A lynx dug the ground in the garden for 3 days. When the man finally approached, what he saw shocked him. What would cause a wild forest animal to dig the ground in the same place for 3 days in a row, from dawn to dusk? This question haunted Peter Matveyevich Sokolov. He stood at the window of his old house and looked into the far corner of the garden. There, at the very edge of the forest, where centuries-old pine trees met his plot, she was there again. A lynx. Young, strong, with tufts on her ears that looked like 2 sharp black feathers. She wasn't sneaking around or hunting. She was working, methodically, stubbornly, throwing clumps of damp earth with its hind paws. It had been going on for 3 days. Pyotr Matveyevich, a geologist by profession and vocation, was accustomed to finding a rational explanation for everything. But here, his logic failed him. A wild animal in the garden was already an event for their remote village of Tikaya Zavod. But a beast that behaved like a possessed digger was beyond comprehension. He frowned his thick gray eyebrows, his gaunt face looking as if it had been carved from stone. A year ago, after the death of his wife Anna, he had moved into this house, her house, and her garden had become his last refuge, his last connection to her. Every bush, every bed had been planted by her hands, and now a strange, wild creature was disrupting this fragile order. Before we continue, let us know which city you are from. We are interested in knowing where our videos are being watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. It motivates us to make new and interesting videos. Well, let's get started. On the first day, he tried to chase her away. He went out onto the porch, clapped his hands loudly, and shouted something angry. The lynx shuddered, her ears pressed against her head. She darted to the side, silently disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Peter breathed a sigh of relief and returned to the house. But an hour later, she was back in the same place, digging again. On the second day, Peter's irritation turned to intense curiosity. He took the binoculars left over from his geological expeditions and began to watch. The lynx was focused. Its powerful paws with retracted claws worked like excavators. The hole was getting noticeably deeper. He went over all the possible options. A badger's burrow? Foxes? But lynxes rarely dig up other animals' burrows with such persistence. Maybe an old water pipe had rotted underground and the smell was attracting her. No, Peter knew for sure that there had never been any utilities in this part of the garden. It was an almost wild piece of land that his Anna had planned to turn into a flower garden. She hadn't had time. The thought of his wife stabbed his heart with a familiar, dull pain. He looked through the binoculars again. The lynx stopped, raised its head, and looked directly toward the house. Their eyes met for a split second. There was no fear or aggression in its yellow eyes, only cold, detached stubbornness. Pyotr Matveyevich put down the binoculars. There was no point in sitting and wondering. He had to ask those who had lived here all their lives. There weren't many options. He threw on an old raincoat and headed across the street to Baba Nina's house. Nina Semyonovna, the 85-year-old keeper of all the village secrets, was sitting on her favorite bench by the front garden. Her sharp, lively eyes spotted Peter halfway there. "What's up, Matveyich? Got the heat on?" she croaked instead of a greeting. "You haven't left the house in 3 days. I was worried something had happened." Peter nodded, stopping at the gate. He didn't like small talk, so he got straight to the point. "Semyonovna, there's a weasel in my garden. It's digging, in one spot." Baba Nina stopped chewing her dry lip for a moment. She narrowed her eyes slyly. "A lynx? Look at you. It's a smart animal. It won't dig for no reason. It must be a bad place. Peter grimaced. He was expecting anything. A story about rodents, underground springs, anything but village superstitions. "What do you mean, bad?" he asked dryly. "It means what it means." Baba Nina leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Your house is old, and the earth here remembers everything. All sorts of strangers have been here, geologists, back in the days of the Soviets. One of them disappeared, they say." She paused meaningfully. Peter felt uncomfortable. He was a geologist himself, and these stories about missing colleagues always annoyed him. "That's nonsense," he said curtly. "I'm asking if an animal could have smelled something, some kind of prey." Baba Nina shrugged. "Maybe prey, or maybe it smelled someone's bones. Restless souls. You shouldn't go near that hole, Matveyich. Better safe than sorry." He turned and walked home without saying goodbye. The conversation did not clarify anything, only added some murky, irrational detail to his rational picture of the world. When he returned, he looked at the garden again. The lynx continued its work, but now Baba Nina's words were spinning insistently in his head. Bones. Soul. What nonsense. The morning of the third day dawned. Peter woke up with a heavy feeling. Something had to be decided today. He went out onto the porch with a cup of cold tea. The picture had changed. The lynx was not digging. It was sitting a few meters from the hole, carefully licking its paw. The hole was already quite deep, almost knee-high for an adult. The animal finished its toilet, raised its head, and looked at the house again. At that moment, Peter felt that the lynx was waiting for him. The thought was so absurd that he even smiled. But the decision had already been made. Enough watching, enough guessing. He put the cup on the railing, went into the shed, and picked up an old bayonet shovel. Its handle was smooth from time, from his father's hands, then his own, and in the last year, from Anna's hands. He walked slowly and deliberately across the garden. The grass was wet with dew. The lynx did not move. She just watched him with her unblinking yellow eyes. Reaching the edge of the pit, Peter stopped. The thick smell of damp, disturbed earth hit his nose. He looked inside. At the bottom, among the clumps of clay, he could see the edge of something dark, something unnatural for this place. It was not a piece of wood or a stone. It was the corner of a piece of rough, tarred cloth. In his youth, such cloth was used to wrap something valuable that needed to be protected from moisture. Pyotr Matveyevich's heart, usually calm and steady, suddenly skipped a beat. He felt a chill run down his spine, despite the warm summer morning. He, a geologist who had seen millions of years of history in rock strata, was suddenly frightened by this small piece of earth in his own garden. He stuck the shovel into the edge of the hole. The earth gave way easily, loose after the animal's paws. He began to dig. Slowly, carefully, as if conducting the most important excavation of his life. The shovel scraped against something hard. The sound was dull and wooden. Peter put down the shovel and knelt down. Without fear of getting dirty, he began to rake away the earth with his hands. A board, blackened by time, appeared from under the clay. Then another. It was the lid of some kind of box, old and roughly nailed together. The wood was damp, almost rotten. He hooked the lid with his fingers and pulled. It gave way with a quiet, squelching sound. Peter looked inside, and his entire rational world collapsed in an instant. The first thing he saw was an old geologist's field bag, leather with copper buckles covered in green patina. He had one just like it when he was young. and next to it, on a bed of rotten newspapers, lay a human skull. The empty eye sockets stared up at the summer sky. Pyotr recoiled, almost falling over. He looked at the box, at the skull, at the bag, and couldn't breathe. The air was stuck in his throat. He looked at the lynx. She was sitting in the same place, calmly watching him, as if her mission had been accomplished. The shock began to recede, replaced by an icy numbness. He, Pyotr Sokolov, had found a grave in his late wife's garden. An unknown, secret grave. Baba Nina's words about the missing geologist no longer seemed like the ravings of a crazy old woman. With a trembling hand, he reached into the pocket of his raincoat for his phone. His fingers wouldn't obey him, slipping off the screen several times. Finally, he found the right number. The local police officer, Sergei Kravtsov. The ringing seemed to last forever. Kravtsov, hello. A sleepy, dissatisfied voice came from the receiver. Pyotr swallowed. Sergei. Igorevich, this is Sokolov, from Tikaya Zavod. What's up, Matveyich? The neighbor's chickens trampled your garden again? The local cop sounded bored. Peter closed his eyes. No, he exhaled. There's a man. In the garden. Sergei on the other end of the line was silent for a moment. The silence was broken only by a crackle in the speaker and a heavy sigh. Matveyich, don't touch anything. Do you hear me? Nothing at all. I'm on my way. Pyotr sat on an upturned bucket a few steps away from the hole, his eyes fixed on it. Time seemed to stand still. The shock slowly receded, giving way to a cold, ringing emptiness inside. He could hear the rustling of leaves on the birch trees and the distant tapping of a woodpecker. The world went on with its usual life. Unaware of the terrible secret that had been revealed on a 6-acre patch of land. The lynx had disappeared, as if having fulfilled its strange, incomprehensible task. It simply dissolved into the forest. Peter didn't even notice when it happened. Now his phone lay forlornly at the edge of the pit, next to a shovel with clumps of earth stuck to it. He forced himself to look at the skull again. Empty eye sockets, dark hollows. Someone's life, someone's dreams and hopes had ended here, in this nameless grave. And he, Peter Sokolov, had mourned his Anna for a year, buried according to all the rules, with flowers and farewell words. This person didn't even have that. His thoughts were confused, clinging to each other. A geologist. Baba Nina mentioned a geologist, a field bag. This is not a coincidence. It is a frightening pattern. 40 minutes later, the strained roar of an engine could be heard. An old police UAZ drove down the village street, kicking up dust. The car stopped at his gate. Sergei Kravtsov, the local police officer, got out from behind the wheel. Stocky, in his perpetually tight uniform, he looked sleepy and dissatisfied. Well, Matveyich, show me who you found there, he said without preamble, slamming the door shut. His tired gaze expressed extreme skepticism. He must have decided that the old man had overheated in the sun or confused some dog bones with human ones. Pyotr silently stood up and nodded toward the garden. Kravtsov sighed heavily and followed, his heavy boots sinking into the soft earth. When they reached the hole, the local cop's face changed. His skepticism vanished instantly, replaced by intense concentration. He frowned, crouched down at the edge, trying not to disturb anything around him. Damn, he cursed quietly. You were right, Matveyich. It's a skull. He straightened up, took his phone and a pack of cigarettes out of his pocket. He lit up and exhaled a stream of smoke. Okay. Didn't touch anything else? His voice had changed, becoming official and harsh. Just took the lid off the box, replied Pyotr. His own voice sounded foreign to him. And this, he pointed to the field bag. This is a geologist's bag, an old model. Kravtsov nodded, his attentive eyes scanning the scene. I see. Who found it? I mean, how did you find it? He corrected himself. Pyotr hesitated for a moment. It seemed silly to mention the lynx, but it was the truth. A lynx, he said evenly. It dug here, 3 days in a row. The detective looked at him as if checking his sanity. A lynx? He asked again. Yes, a wild lynx from the forest. It dug this hole. I only came here this morning when it was finished. Sergei Kravtsov rubbed his nose. All right. We'll put the lynx down as unexplained circumstances. The main thing is this. He nodded toward the hole. He took a couple of steps back and started calling someone, speaking in short, abrupt phrases. Yes, I'm here. Tikaya Zavod, Sokolov's house? Yes, looks like a crime, an old one. We need forensic experts and an investigation team. How long will it take? Got it. Finishing the conversation, he returned to Peter. They're on their way. From the district center. They'll be here in 2 hours, no sooner. Until they arrive, cordon off the perimeter and don't leave any traces. He took a red and white tape out of the car and began to stretch it across the far corner of the garden, hammering the pegs he had brought with him into the ground. Peter stood rooted to the spot. His garden, a place of quiet memories of Anna, was turning into a crime scene before his eyes. It was surreal. When the improvised cordon was ready, Kravtsov approached the hole again. He crouched down once more. A geological bag, you say? He asked thoughtfully. Yes. I'm a geologist myself. I had one just like it in the 70s. So this one is probably his too, concluded the local police officer. His gaze was fixed on the copper buckles. If there are any documents in there, that would make things a lot easier. He looked at Peter. Matveyich, can you find some rubber gloves at home? Any kind of household gloves? Peter nodded and went into the house like a robot. He returned with a pair of yellow gloves that Anna used for weeding. Sergei put them on carefully. I understand that we should wait for the experts, but if there's a passport in there, we'll save a lot of time. This case seems to be a 40-year-old cold case. The sooner we start, the better. He carefully pulled the bag toward him with 2 fingers. The leather crackled but held. He placed it on a patch of clean grass and began to unfasten the buckles. The locks were difficult to open. Inside, everything was covered with a layer of dust and mold that had stuck together from moisture. On top lay a geological hammer with a cracked handle and a compass with a greenish dial. Peter recognized these tools. They were the extension of any field geologist's arm. Sergei carefully removed them and placed them nearby. And underneath them lay her, a thin notebook with a cardboard cover, a field diary. The pages had stuck together and curled from the moisture. But fortunately, the ink had not completely faded. Sergei handed the notebook to Peter. Look, you know more about this. Look for a name, a surname, anything. Peter's fingers trembled in his thin gloves. He opened the first page with reverence and fear. On the yellowed paper, in calligraphic, slightly slanted handwriting, was written, Field Diary, Stepan Andreevich Yartsev, Geological Exploration Party No. 12, Season 1975. Peter read the name aloud. Stepan Yartsev. Now the skull in the pit had a name. 75, Kravtsov muttered, jotting something down in his notebook. Almost 50 years ago. Peter flipped through a few pages. The notes were dry and professional. Descriptions of rock types, coordinates of pits, sketches of cross-sections. He felt a strange kinship with this man who had walked the same forests and looked at the same rocks. Suddenly, one of the last entries caught his eye. The date was July 15th, 1975. "Found an amazing place," wrote Stepan Yartsev, "a quiet, secluded spot at the very edge of the taiga, on the outskirts of the village of Tikaya Zavod. From here, there is a stunning view of the river. If I ever decide to settle down, I will build a house right here. I can't imagine a better place to live." Peter's breath caught in his throat. He looked up from the diary and looked at his house, at the place where he and Anna used to drink tea in the evenings, at the vegetable beds she loved so much. He was standing in the very spot that Stepan Yartsev had written about, the place that was supposed to be his home but became his grave. The realization was like a blow to the gut. Pyotr Matveyevich looked at his house, at the apple trees planted by Anna's father, at the river glistening in the distance, and saw it all through the eyes of another man, Stepan Yartsev. He had stood in this very spot almost half a century ago and dreamed. And he, Pyotr, was living in his dream, a dream that had become a grave. The thought was unbearable. It mixed his own grief with the tragedy of a stranger, weaving them into a tight, suffocating knot. He suddenly understood why Anna loved this place so much. She felt his spirit, his bright energy, not knowing what darkness lay hidden just a few dozen meters from the porch. Or maybe she knew. Felt it? That question would remain unanswered. He carefully closed the diary, as if afraid of damaging the fragile memory locked inside. At that moment, cars arrived from the district center. A white van with the words "Criminal Laboratory" written on it and another UAZ, from which two men in plain clothes and one in uniform, older than Kravtsov, got out. The village, which had been dozing in the summer silence, came to life. Curious faces appeared behind the fences. Neighbors whispered, pointing toward Sokolov's house. Peter felt like an exhibit in a museum. His quiet world, his refuge, had turned into a stage for someone else's show. People in white overalls and gloves began their methodical, emotionless work. They photographed everything from different angles, collected soil samples, carefully removed bones from the pit, and laid them out on a special film. Their every movement was measured and precise. They treated the remains as material evidence, devoid of name and history. But for Peter, this was Stepan Yartsev, a fellow geologist who had dreamed of a house on this shore. Sergei Kravtsov introduced him to the senior investigator, a sullen man in his 50s with a tired face. The investigator asked Peter a few formal questions, which Peter listened to and answered mechanically. Yes, he was the owner of the house. Yes, he had found the remains. Yes, he hadn't touched anything except the lid of the box. The diary and bag were confiscated and packed into a special bag as important evidence. Peter felt a pang of protest. This diary was the only thread connecting him to the deceased. "I need to read it," he said unexpectedly firmly, surprising himself with his insistence. The investigator looked at him in bewilderment. "Mr. Sokolov, this is material evidence in a murder case. It will be examined by experts." "I'm a geologist," Peter insisted. "I'll understand things you won't notice. There may be details that only a specialist would understand. Maps, notes in the margins, professional terms. It could be important." He spoke calmly, but there was steel in his voice. Sergei Kravtsov, standing nearby, intervened. "Viktor Semyonovich," he said to the investigator. "Maybe it makes sense. Matveyich is a local man. He's smart. And you can see what kind of case this is. It's old. Any clue is worth its weight in gold." Let me take responsibility for leaving him the diary overnight. We'll make photocopies of the pages, and he can read the original for now. By morning, he'll have explained everything to us." The investigator hesitated, but apparently the prospect of deciphering 50-year-old geological scribbles did not appeal to him. "All right, Kravtsov. On your responsibility. But in the morning, give me a detailed report on its contents, and make sure the diary is on my desk." When the commotion in the yard had died down a little and the experts had taken their gruesome finds away, Peter went into the house. On the kitchen table, where he and Anna had drunk tea so many times, now lay Stepan Yartsev's diary. Peter turned on the lamp, sat down, and opened it again. He read slowly, page after page, immersing himself in another person's world. The first entries were full of enthusiasm. Yartsev described the beauty of the taiga, the rare minerals he found, his thoughts about his work. Like Peter, he was a man of science, but not without a romantic streak. He was delighted by the pattern of lichen on a rock and the singing of birds at dawn. Peter felt his sympathy for this long-dead man growing. He could have been his friend. And then the tone of the notes began to change. About a month before his death, Yartsev began to explore a small stream that flowed into a river a few kilometers from the village. "Found some interesting samples," he wrote. "Quartz inclusions with veins. Visually, there is colored metal. I need to take some samples. Could I have stumbled upon what the old men were whispering about?" The next entry was made a few days later. It was short and disturbing. "My guess was right. It's gold. Not on an industrial scale, but the vein is good. And it seems I'm not the first one here. I found traces of a recent camp and primitive tools for washing the rock. Someone is working here quietly." Peter felt a chill run down his spine. Here it was, the beginning of the tragedy. He turned the page. The entry was dated July 10th, 1975. "I came across them. 3 local men. They had set up something like a camp in a remote ravine. Their faces were unfriendly and wary. I tried to talk to them, to explain that it was illegal, that the deposit had to be registered. They just grinned. They told me to go on my way and keep my mouth shut." Peter clenched his fists. How naive. Going to the poachers in a group of 3 and lecturing them about the law. This Yartsev was a true Soviet intellectual who believed in the power of words and justice. And that belief was his undoing. He reached the last pages. They were covered in hasty, sloppy handwriting. You could tell that the man had written in a state of great agitation. "They're watching me. I saw one of them yesterday at my tent in the forest. He pretended to be picking mushrooms, but he never took his eyes off me. They're afraid I'll report them, and they're right to be afraid. Tomorrow I'm going to the district center to see the police chief. This cannot be allowed to continue. It is state property." And then came the last entry. Peter leaned closer to the page, squinting at the faded ink. The date had been erased, but it appeared to be July 16th or 17th. "The situation is heating up. They came again today. They didn't beat around the bush. They threatened me. They said that the taiga is big and it's easy to get lost in it. Their leader, a man of about 40 whom they call Stepanik, is clearly a cruel and ruthless man. He said that I wouldn't leave here alive unless I forgot the way to the stream. I pretended to be scared and agreed. I need to leave immediately. I hid my most valuable samples and maps in a box under an old pine tree where I dreamed of building a house. Tomorrow morning, at dawn, I'm leaving. The main thing is that..." The note was cut off. It didn't end with a period. The last word was unfinished. The pen left a greasy blob on the paper, as if the hand holding it had been stopped by someone's cruel, sudden force. Pyotr looked at the broken sentence, at the greasy blob at the end, and saw the whole picture as if it were unfolding right before his eyes. Stepan Yartsov is sitting in his tent or here, in this very spot, under an old pine tree, hurriedly writing these lines. He is full of determination and anxiety. He thinks he has outsmarted them, that he still has a whole night left. And at that moment, a shadow appears behind him. A blow. Short, dull, and that's it. The end. The last thought. The last word remains on this page. Pyotr Matveyevich closed the diary. His hands were trembling slightly. Now it was not just sympathy. It had become his personal business. He, geologist Sokolov, must finish what geologist Yartsov had not had time to do. Not for revenge, but for justice, so that the skull in the unmarked grave could become a person again. In the morning, as promised, Sergei Kravtsov arrived. The district police officer looked even more tired than yesterday. Apparently, he had had a restless night. "Well, Matveyich, have you read it?" he asked, sitting down at the kitchen table. Pyotr silently pushed the diary and a glass of water toward him. "I read it," he replied evenly. "They killed him. 3 illegal gold miners. The diary describes their camp and even gives the nickname of the leader, Stepanik. The last entry is cut off mid-sentence." He recounted the contents of the last few pages in detail, without emotion. Sergei listened attentively, frowning more and more. He made notes in his notebook. When Pyotr finished, the district police officer leaned back in his chair. "Stepanik, 75. That's almost half a century ago. Who would remember nicknames like that now? Everyone who might have known something is either dead or gone." His voice sounded familiar and skeptical. The case was hopeless, a dead end from the start. "Not everyone," Peter objected. He looked Kravtsov straight in the eye. "There's a person in our village who might remember. Baba Nina." Sergei grimaced as if he had a toothache. "Matveyich, are you serious? Go to some old woman with tall tales about a murder that happened 50 years ago? She'll give us a dozen names, half of whom are long dead. She told me herself yesterday about the geologist who disappeared," insisted Peter. "She remembers, I'm sure. We just need to ask the right questions, not about the murder, but about those who suddenly got rich in those years, who stopped drinking and started building houses or bought a car. In Soviet times, in such a remote place, that was a big deal. It couldn't have gone unnoticed. The idea was simple, but it had an iron logic to it." Sergei thought about it. He looked out the window at his UAZ, then turned his gaze to Peter. He saw before him not just an old witness, but a stubborn, intelligent man who would not back down. "All right," he sighed. "You've won, Matveyich. Let's go to your key witness. But let's do it this way. I'll do the questioning. You just sit nearby, okay? So as not to scare her off." Baba Nina's house was filled with the smell of dried herbs and old wood. The mistress herself, wearing her usual headscarf, sat at the table drinking tea from a saucer. When she saw the local police officer at the door and Sokolov with him, she sat up straight. Her small eyes sparkled with curiosity. "What's going on, my dears? Have you caught a thief?" she squeaked. Sergei entered the room, politely declining the tea. "We have a matter to discuss, Nina Semenovna. It's of state importance," he began cautiously, with a degree of seriousness intended to impress the old woman. "We're going through some old archives. We're looking for geologists who worked here in the 70s. Do you remember them?" Baba Nina snorted. How could I forget? They used to walk around here with their hammers. They were tapping stones. One of them, a young man with curly hair, disappeared. They said a bear killed him in the taiga. Or maybe he ran away. Who knows about city folks? That's what we're talking about. Sergei picked up, choosing his words carefully. We're looking for information. Maybe you remember, Semyonovna, if there was anything unusual in those years, right after the geologist disappeared? Maybe one of the local men started living better? Did anyone come into some easy money? Baba Nina thought for a moment. She took a sip of tea from her saucer, her gaze drifting into the past. Pyotr and Sergei waited, afraid to break the silence. Money, she finally said. Everyone had the same amount of money back then, from paycheck to paycheck. But to get it all at once, that was something else. She put the saucer on the table. There were 3 of us, friends and drinking buddies. Grisha Smolin, Vasya Petukov, and Fedka Kosoy. We drank like fish. And then, sometime in the summer of '75, it just stopped. They quit drinking and got jobs. Fedka bought himself a Moskvich, yellow as a chicken. The whole village came running to see it. And Grisha built a new house, 2 stories, the first one in the village. They said they went to the city to earn money, to the north. But who would believe them? Sergei Kravtsov's eyes lit up. He quickly jotted down notes in his notebook. Smolin, Petukov, and Kosoy. What were their street names? Did they have nicknames? Baba Nina smiled slyly. Of course. Fedka was called Kosi because he was cross-eyed. Vasya was just Petuk. And Grisha was a serious man, older than them. Everyone respected and feared him. They just called him Stepanik. Silence fell in the room. Peter felt a chill run down his spine again. Stepanik. The name from the diary had taken on a life of its own. It was Grigory Smolin. Sergei Kravtsov closed his notebook. Nina Semyonovna, thank you. You've been very helpful. His voice sounded completely different now. It was filled with excitement, the excitement of a hunter who had picked up a trail. When they went out into the street, he turned to Peter. Matveyich, you were right. 1,000 times right. Now we have names. He looked at his notes. Right. Smolin Grigory Stepanovich, that means. Vasya Petukov, that is Vasily, and Fyodor Kosoy. We need to run them through the databases. Find out which of them are still alive. The trip to the district center, to the police department, took less than an hour. Sergei sat at his desk, tapping away at the computer keyboard. Peter waited, sitting on a visitor's chair. He felt like he was part of a real investigation. Finally, Sergei leaned back in his chair. Okay, here's the picture. Vasily Petukov, Petuk, died 10 years ago of cirrhosis of the liver. Grigory Smolin, also known as Stepanich, died 5 years ago of a heart attack. His house is still standing in Tikaya Zavod, and his heirs from the city can't sell it. He paused, looking at Peter. And the third, Fyodor, nicknamed Kosoy, is alive. He is now 72 years old. After that story with the Moskvich, he soon sold it and left the village. He settled in the neighboring district, in the village of Lesnoy. He lives quietly, a pensioner, with a vegetable garden and grandchildren. He has not been seen doing anything reprehensible. Peter's breath caught in his throat. He was alive. One of them was alive. The only one who could tell the truth. The only key to solving the mystery of Stepan Yartsev's death. Sergei stood up. Let's go, Matveyich. We'll visit the pensioner. We'll talk about fishing, the weather, and about the year 1975. The village of Lesnoy was no different from hundreds of other villages scattered across the country. Identical houses, dusty streets, silence broken only by the barking of dogs. The house of Fyodor Koshov, as Baba Nina called him, stood on the outskirts. A well-kept front garden, a freshly painted fence. A short, elderly man was busy in the garden. He was wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. One of his eyes was slightly crossed, giving his face a wary, assessing expression. Seeing the police UAZ pull up and the local cop and an unfamiliar old man get out, he straightened up, leaning on his shovel. His face showed no surprise, only a dull, hidden anxiety. Sergei Kravtsov approached the gate. "Fyodor Mikhailovich?" he asked formally. The man nodded slowly. "I'm Kravtsov, the local police officer, and this is Pyotr Matveyevich Sokolov. Can we talk to you for a couple of minutes?" Fyodor stuck the shovel into the ground. He wiped his hands on his pants and slowly walked toward them. He moved stiffly, as if every movement caused him pain. "Come in, since you're here," he muttered, opening the gate. They walked into the yard and sat down on an old wooden bench under an apple tree. Fyodor remained standing, looking at them from under his eyebrows. "What do you want?" he asked, and Pyotr detected a carefully concealed tremor in his voice. Sergei didn't beat around the bush. "We're here about something from the past, Fyodor Mikhailovich, from 1975, from the village of Tikaya Zavod." At the mention of the village and the year, Fyodor visibly tensed. His shoulders slumped, and he seemed to shrink in stature. He remained silent. "We found a man," Sergei continued, watching his reaction closely. "A geologist, Stepan Yartsev. His remains were found on the Sokolov's property. He was killed." Fyodor shuddered. He slowly crouched down, as if his legs refused to hold him up. He stared at the ground, at his hands, cracked from work. The silence dragged on. Pyotr couldn't take it anymore. He took the diary out of his jacket's inside pocket. He shouldn't have taken it, but he couldn't leave it behind. He opened the last page. He wrote everything down, Fyodor Mikhailovich. Peter said quietly but clearly. He wrote about the stream, about the gold, about the 3 local men, about the threats, about Stepanik, Grigory Smolin. Fyodor raised his head. His eyes were filled with horror. It wasn't fear of punishment. It was horror at the past that had burst into his quiet old age and grabbed him by the throat. "I didn't want to," he whispered. His lips barely moved. No one wanted to. It just happened. And he began to cry. Quietly, silently. The 72-year-old man sat crouched in the middle of his yard and cried like a child. Tears streamed down his wrinkled cheeks and dripped onto the ground. Sergei Kravtsov let him cry. Then he took out a tape recorder and placed it on a bench. "Tell me everything, Fyodor Mikhailovich. Tell me everything, just as it happened. This is your only chance." And Fyodor began to speak. His story was disjointed and confused. He jumped from one thing to another, but the overall picture that emerged was terrifying in its ordinariness. They had indeed stumbled upon a small gold vein. At first, they just washed a little bit at a time, enough for a drink. But their appetite grew as they ate. Their leader was Grisha Smolin, Stepanik. He was older, more experienced, and had been in prison for fighting. He organized everything. And then this geologist showed up. "He was a good man," whispered Fyodor. "A decent man. He came to us and started talking about the law, about the state. And what did we do? We'd never seen the law in our lives. Stepanik told him to get lost. But the geologist was stubborn. He said he would report us. The fear of losing easy money proved stronger than common sense. They started following him. That evening, they drank for courage and went to see him. Not to kill him, just to scare him so he would leave and keep quiet. We came to his tent by the old pine tree on the edge of the village. Fyodor stared at one spot, as if he could see that night again. He was sitting there, writing something in his notebook. Stepanich came up behind him. He just wanted to slap him on the shoulder, turn him around. But he had a hammer in his hand, a geological hammer. He had taken it from the geologist's bag earlier to look at it. His hand was heavy, and he was drunk. He struck him, and the geologist, he just fell down. And that was it. Silence. Fyodor fell silent, breathing heavily. We didn't know what to do. We were scared to death. Stepanich said we had to hide it. There was a hole nearby. We widened it, threw him in there with the bag. We buried him. Then we ran away. And we agreed to keep quiet. Until the day we die. They divided the little gold they had managed to pan. And this secret, this sin, ruined their lives. Vasya Petukov drank himself to death. Stepanich lived in constant fear, shying away from every police car. And he, Fyodor, ran away. He tried to forget, to start a new life. But every night, for almost 50 years, he dreamed of that geologist falling to the ground. I even went to his grave, Fyodor said suddenly, looking at Peter. In secret. Once a year, I would come to Tikhaya Zavod at night. I would go to the place that your father-in-law later bought. I would just stand there. I asked for forgiveness. His confession was complete. Sergei turned off the tape recorder. The case was solved. A case that was half a century old, which began with a lynx digging in the garden for 3 days. A few days later, Pyotr Matveyevich stood in a small village cemetery. Next to his wife Anna's grave was another, fresh one, a modest wooden cross with a simple plaque. Yartsev Stepan Andreevich, 1945-1975. He obtained permission for the reburial. He considered it his duty. Stepan's story, his dream, and his tragic death strangely helped him. His own pain over Anna did not go away, but it ceased to be all-consuming. It became part of a larger story, the story of this place, where dreams, love, greed, and death were intertwined. He no longer felt alone. He felt a connection with Anna, with Stepan, with this land. In the evening, he sat on the porch and looked at his garden. Everything was as usual. The beds, the flowers, the apple trees. But now this place had taken on a new depth, a new history. He thought about the lynx. What made her dig here of all places? A few days before the funeral, Sergei called him and laughed as he recounted the conclusion of the zoologist they had brought in for form's sake. It was ridiculously simple. An old wooden box that had been lying in the ground for half a century became the perfect home for a large colony of field mice. The lynx, with its phenomenal hearing, simply heard its prey underground. No mysticism, no signs from above, just animal instinct. The predator smelled its dinner, and this simple, realistic explanation was the best ending to the whole story for Peter. Nature lives by its own laws, and sometimes, quite by accident, these laws reveal the deepest and darkest secrets of human beings. Peter looked at the edge of the forest, where the lynx had disappeared. He didn't know if it would return, but he was grateful to it. Without knowing it, the wild animal had brought peace to not one, but 2 souls. And one of them was his. What do you think would have been the right thing to do? Let Fyodor Kosov live out his life with the burden of guilt, or insist on a trial, despite his age and remorse?